welcome. Good evening. Hello, how are you all? Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see so many new faces and many old faces too. For those of you who don't know me or didn't meet me on the way in, my name is Toby Altman and I'm the new director of the RCAH Center for Poetry. And I'm very happy to welcome you here for my first big event. I couldn't be with a more inspiring and interesting figure, Dianna Frid. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we are gathered and the history of colonialism and dispossession that has shaped our presence on it. I'll start by reading a land acknowledgement drafted by the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Department here at Michigan State. I quote, "Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic indigenous communities in Michigan, for indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples." As the director of the Center for Poetry and as a teacher, reader, and lover of poetry, I would like to add that I believe poetry has a special responsibility to carry forward the work outlined in this land acknowledgement. Part of poetry's power comes from its capacity to name historical injury, to give language to historical harm that might otherwise be ignored or forgotten. And part of poetry's power comes from its capacity to expand the frame of the possible, so that even in a world which has been scarred, is being scarred by the violence of colonialism, we can turn to poetry to help us imagine what healing and solidarity look like. Our guest this evening, the book and textile artist Dianna Frid, has thought deeply about these questions, about the way that history touches us and the way that we touch it in return. Indeed, it may be inappropriate to refer to her as a book and textile artist. To the extent that one can generalize about Frid's work, one might say that her medium is time itself. But her work resists such generalizations. It cannot be separated from its specifics, the thread she uses, the text she quotes, the archival encounters that prompt her. So in lieu of generalization, let me offer you an example. Her 2015 artist book, Esta Mina, or in its English translation, This Is a Mine. As you open the book and begin to turn its pages, you see that Frid has cut a series of holes into the book's folio-sized canvas pages. And you realize that she has hidden something at the bottom of these holes, a set of glimmering gemstones. The book has no language besides its title, but it is nonetheless a meditation on the act of reading, the way that each reader opens a particular passageway through the book that they read, the way that reading sometimes feels like mining, extracting hidden gems from a mass of text, and of course, the way that readers devour books. Not for nothing do we call ourselves bookworms. What is a book? What does it mean to read? Esta Mina raises vertiginous questions about an act, an object we might otherwise take for granted. But it is also a book that affects an alchemical transformation of historical damage. Frid conceived the book in response to the holdings of La Biblioteca Francisco de Burgoa, a rare book library in Oaxaca, Mexico. Many of the Burgoa's books, including this 17th century geological treatise by Athenaeus Kircher, have been attacked by bookworms, literal bookworms in this case. Esta Mina takes its cue from the bookworms. When Frid carves the canvas pages of her book, she is imitating the holes they carved into the Burgoa's books. She takes the damage these books have endured and converts it into something beautiful. She raises aesthetic possibility from historical injury. I've said that Frid is an artist who makes time itself her medium. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that in a book like Esta Mina, she makes time her co-author. Not just time, the bookworms too are her co-authors. she enters into collaboration with forces beyond the human, the intimate work of insects nesting in a book, the vast impersonal sweep of history. Like so much of Dianna Frid's work, Estamina is playful and beautiful, dazzlingly so. But set in its full context, I also find it quite moving. At a moment where it is hard to acknowledge, let alone process, all the historical loss that surrounds us, Frid teaches us how to look slowly, carefully, and persistently, slowly enough, carefully enough, that we begin to see the possibility of beauty again. Dianna Frid is an artist working at the intersection of material texts and textiles. Her artist books and mixed media works make visible the tactile manifestations of language. In her work, embroidery is a prominent vehicle for exploring the relationships between writing and drawing and the overlaps of transcription, translation, and legibility. Frid was born in Mexico City, where she was first exposed to textiles as complex codes of material writing. At the age of 15, she immigrated with her family to Vancouver, Canada. These and other reference points help her situate her work alongside lineages that embrace art and needlework without framing them in hierarchical opposition. Time, rhythm, process, and matter are never in opposition. I just want to say the last paragraph that I read is part of Dianna's bio, and I think it's like the most beautiful bio I've ever read. I mean, we should all write bios like that. Dianna Frid is professor in the art department at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. Frid has received numerous grants, including a 3 Arts Award, as well as support from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Illinois Arts Council, and the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Please join me in welcoming Dianna Frid.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was amazing. Thank you. Really significant, thoughtful. I want to thank Toby for inviting me to be here tonight, and to everybody who made this possible. I want to thank the students who spoke with me earlier today and yesterday. We do this for you, really. That's why we're educators. And I want to thank everybody who's here tonight, that we made a little bit of time to see something perhaps, maybe it's poetry, I don't know. The title of the talk is We Have No Word in English for This, and Other Words From Obituaries. It is a lecture in 3 chapters. It is a lecture in 3 chapters, and I want to say that by now I've been making work for many, many years, so I have many bodies of work. Tonight I'm going to touch on only a few of them, but if you have questions afterwards, I can pull up my website. The first chapter is the longest one. Chapter 1, Timeline with Words. Chapter 2 is Time is Textile, Textile is Book. And chapter 3 is It Takes Time. So here we go. My notes are not showing up. Okay. The rhymes bind the lines together, so the material of which they are made must be stronger than the material for the other lines. This is Vladimir Mayakovsky, a line from his book, How Are Verses Made? And I ask myself, day in, day out, what is this strong material of which the rhymes are made? Much of my work is rooted in material texts and their relation to textile. Texere in Latin is the root. It is to weave, and it is text and textile combined. We are wearing texts. My approach to making art, which is technically closer to drawing and needlework than it is to weaving, embraces the interconnected experiences of the linguistic, the visual, and the physical in ways that cloth has done across millennia. This work is from an ongoing series called Words from Obituaries, where I embroider on graphite very short excerpts from long-form obituaries published in the New York Times. Written with lemon juice is from the obituary of Melba Hernandez, a Cuban revolutionary who was also a friend of Fidel Castro. Use these words. How could I not? This is the command I found in the obituary of Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini. A compelling aspect of obituaries is that they are life stories. In the obituary form, these narratives are condensed. With my Words from Obituaries series, I distill this condensed form even further. In 2002, poet Stephen Motika and I collaborated on a project we named The Field. For the project, Stephen invented the obituary of a fictitious man he named Leon Rednick. Rednick purportedly discovered an imaginary asteroid that we named Mitos. According to the obituary, Leon Rednick discovered Mitos in 1976. The asteroid Mitos orbits around this obituary. Professor Rednick was a beloved and prolific scholar of exile. He was renowned for more than a dozen books on the subject, where he argued for what he called, quote, the inner wisdom of exile, unquote. But above all, he was well known as an amateur astronomer. He came up with a nomenclature system for naming the craters of the asteroid he discovered. And this is how the craters of Mitos came to be named after literary characters who left their home never to return. For example, one crater of Mitos was named after Macabea, the protagonist of The Hour of the Star, Clarice Lispector's final novel published in Brazil in 1977. In 1926, Soviet poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, born in Georgia in Central Asia, wrote a book with a Russian title, Как делать стихи. Depending on the English translation, the titles of Как делать стихи have varied and include How to Make Verse, How Poems Are Made, and How Are Verses Made, with a question mark. Mayakovsky's poetry was revolution unto itself. He died tragically in the Soviet Union in 1930. Adrienne Rich, one of the United States' most prominent poets, was born 3 years after the Soviet publication of How Are Verses Made. She died on March 27, 2012, in Santa Cruz, in California. That summer, the magazine Art Forum published an obituary of Adrienne Rich. Its author, the poet Elizabeth Willis, wrote, Rich passed along a small pink volume to me, saying she would never be able to read it again, but wanted to know it was being read. It was a dog-eared copy of Vladimir Mayakovsky's How Are Verses Made, a book full of questions and propositions. Rhythm is the fundamental force, the fundamental energy of verse. You can't explain it, You can only talk about it as you do about magnetism or electricity. In 1970, Howard vs. Maid was translated for the first time to English by G.M. Hyde. Rhythm is the fundamental force, the fundamental energy of verse. Rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. Rhythm is a fundamental force, a fundamental energy of verse. Then, in 1971, Howard vs. Maid, or Pacto del Sticky, was translated to Spanish for the first time. I Myself, How to Make Verses is a translation. There is such a thing called second languaging. Ritmo, 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 rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. El ritmo es la fuerza fundamental, la energía fundamental del verso. Texto, textil, textil, texto. Text, textile, textile, text. The first known textile of South America was discovered in Guitarrero Cave in Peru. It was woven out of vegetable fiber and dates back to 8,000 years before the Common Era. We are spinning and dying. Spinning and dying, spinning and dying. We're spinning and dying. We're spinning and dying. On January 4, 1966, the artist Kawara created the first of his date paintings that comprise the Today series. The Today series consists of monochromatic canvases in which only the date is painted in white. Kawara worked on the Today series for 47 years. Each painting was intentionally produced in just one day, according to a series of systematized steps. The date inscribed on the painting corresponds to the date the work was made. If a painting was not finished by midnight, Kawara would destroy it. He fabricated a cardboard storage box for the paintings, and many of these boxes are lined with a cutting from a local newspaper published that day. For example, the box for 14 de agosto 1968 is lined with a clipping of Excelsior, which in 1968 was Mexico's largest newspaper. In 47 years, Kawara produced several thousands of these paintings, working in more than 130 places around the world. He died in 2014. In 2002, I began to collect long-form obituaries from the New York Times. In 2010, with the death of my father, I began to take a closer look at that collection. Obituaries revealed themselves to me as both summations and redactions of lives clearly irreducible. That year, while reading the 2002 New York Times obituary of linguist Alan Reed, I found solace in the astonishing words, the fourth word spoken on the moon. Here's the first piece of the Words from Obituaries series, and it's called New York Times, October 18, 2002, Alan Reed. Little did I know that with this fragment, I began what would soon become the Words from Obituaries series. In print, Alan Reed's obituary said that the word okay was the fourth word spoken on the moon. Shortly after, the New York Times corrected this online to say that okay was one of the first words spoken on the moon. Between 1971 and 1972, Adrienne Rich wrote the poem Diving into the Wreck. In the poem she wrote, I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. The words are purposes. The words are maps. This image is from an exhibit called It Takes Time, created in 2017 by Kendra Hates, and it featured over 30 works from the series. And this is an abbreviated version that was curated later by Alan Coppell in 2019 for an exhibit called More Time Than Life. Today, in 2024, there are more than 50 pieces in the Words from Obituaries series. And these are some of them. I'll go slowly. From the obituary of poet Simin Devahan, to find it had been written by a woman. From the obituary of scientist Joan Feynman, be a woman. From the obituary of physicist Jacob Bekenstein, who studied black holes. There's no return. From the obituary of artist Fred Sandbach, another uncanny illusionistic effect. From the obituary of Mohawk code talker Louis Levi Oakes, he carries the snow. From the obituary of philanthropist Peter E. Lewis. Enjoy my philanthropy. From the obituary of linguist Lila Blackman. Hold on tight. From the obituary of football player Bobby Dillon. Hit me in the face with a board. From the obituary of translator Gregory Rabassa. was referring to translating 100 Years of Solitude. Torment began with the first word. And from the obituary of Professor Richard H. Hoggart, who defended the issue as his great charities lover. We have no word in English for this. Each work consists of 4 quadrants and has 2 or 3 lines of text. There are no spaces between words, which slows down our reading. This is how the text becomes, amongst other things, a substance. In some of the words from obituaries, sometimes the enjambment happens mid-word, as in English here. And each title of the work starts with the date of publication and is followed by their name. It takes more than 1 day to complete a work. I didn't know this would be a series until I made a color chart. Because I embroidered with pink thread the very first piece in the series, the Allen Reed piece, I subsequently began to use pink thread for people who work with language. Poets, novelists, translators, coders, for instance. Red would be for teachers, orange for artists and designers who are not writers, purple for performers who are not artists, for example, athletes, green for scientists and explorers, yellow for activists and dissidents, blue for doctors, gray for persons who committed crimes against humanity, atrocities, terrorist acts. But classification systems are incongruities. People are not remembered for one thing only. Nobody is only one whole integrated self. Everybody hates you. There is an embedded absurdity within this project, as there is with any classification or naming system. Order is idiosyncratic. The words "everybody hates you" are from the obituary of Luis Posada Carriles. Posada Carriles was a Cuban political dissident who went into exile in the United States. To some, he was a hero, but he was also a terrorist. Classification is always already subjective and convenient for the one who invents it. Vladimir Katryuk, for instance, was not just a beekeeper. He was also a war criminal who evaded justice and died in his 90s in Canada. He was not scared of bees. From the obituary of war criminal Michael Karkok. Karkok was, at the time of his death, a retired Minnesota carpenter. And he did get into the United States. So I'll end this chapter, chapter 1, with this on timeline, with a poem I made with the help of the algorithm of the New York Times obituary department. The obituaries are of Michael Karkok, Jorge Rafael Videla, Oscar Gröning, and Slobodan Paljak, all of whom committed crimes against humanity. Getting to the United States, civilization. I saw everything. It was love. Chapter 2, Time is textile, textile is book. This is kernel. I make things. I make them, it seems, manually and slowly. But from the perspective of the obsidian at the heart of this book, the kernel, for example, the manual is not really that slow. This text is from the Portuguese. It's in Portuguese here. It's from Clarice Lispector's Hour of the Star, and it says, all the world began with a yes. One molecule said yes to another molecule, and life was born. And this is the comments. And this is the waves. This is Abyss. It went really fast. There's a glitch with the slide. It's Abyss. I'll read it because the photograph is too loud. Abyss. About Eros. Abundance, abandon. Abyss. come to sight be? They are magical words, magical apart from their meaning, physically magical, with magic inherent in the sound itself. Words that before they deliver a meaning, already have a meaning, do not require comprehension, but only hearing. Words of the animals, the child's dream language. It is possible that each person has in their own life their own magic words. I was exiting my world and entering the world. Coda. 1. A single gram of gold can be beaten into a sheet of 1 square meter. 2. Gold is thought to have been produced in supernova nucleosynthesis and to have been present in the dust from which the solar system formed. 3. 4.5 billion years ago, when early Earth was molten, the gold that was present sank to the core. 4. However, it is likely that much of the gold in the Earth's crust and mantle was delivered later by asteroid impacts 4 billion years ago. 5. The Aztecs called gold Teocuitlatu, God excrement. Most Aztec gold was violently expropriated to Spain. 6. We are not made to reveal to what extent we are complex. 7. You open the book and you have already crossed the border. So the color code is red is Helen Sixu, blue is Clarice Lispector, purple is Marina Tsvetaeva, all of which are in Sixu's book, 3 Steps in the Ladder of Writing, and the text zoning grains data found in the internet. In my work, I ask open-ended questions about the nature of time and language. Some of these questions are questions of scale, such as how we apprehend that we are a part of very long cycles of matter's transformation, and that the question guided the process. In her essay on the loom, Annie Alders wrote, "Our machinery has become intricate, our manner of working fast. Yet every age must have felt that way about its achievements, and only looking back does everything that went before seem slow." This is a piece that I'm working on right now with Toño Mendoza and Lili Vasquez, who are 2 Zapotec leaders in Teotitlán del Valle. It's a transcription of the same text that I read, but it's from the Spanish translation. From her show at the Guggenheim 3 years ago. Y I can read it to you. Nuestra maquinaria se ha hecho muy compleja, nuestra manera de trabajar rápida, sin embargo, cada época habrá experimentado lo mismo con respecto a sus logros. Y solo cuando volvemos la mirada atrás, todo lo que sucedió antes nos parece bien. Chapter 3. It takes time. For a decade, I've been thinking about the nest that bookworms make of books. And I have also been thinking about the speed of light that travels through these holes, these tunnels. There is no need to turn the pages to get to the other side. Turning the pages, turning the pages. Instead, burrowing, digging, prying through. Often, you can see the bite marks left as evidence of diligence and energy. Wormholes in the universe, the cosmic ones, get their names from the wormholes in books. Time travel. The hurdle of the page disappears, and instant transit is possible from one side of the tunnel to another. Although libraries and librarians are tasked with the conservation and custodianship of books, the transformation of substances and form is inevitable. It is just a matter of time. I am thinking of the life force of bugs, a life force that thrived by making books their dwellings. The traces that insects and other bugs leave behind are astonishing. Librarians might see these books as destroyed. I see them as annotated and newly legible. I once said that these books are annotated through touch. They are annotated by biting, chewing, swallowing, metabolizing. I suppose all of these are forms of touch. As humans, some of us relate to the metaphor of being born through books, or of books being shelters. The carvings where insects gestated are not metaphors, though. It has taken me quite some time to understand that I cannot improve on what the insects made. But as an artist, I can witness the remains, the beautiful wreck, and try to find a way to tell a story of what happens to matter. It will happen to all of us and into everything in one way or another. So we might as well take pleasure in it. It takes time to find the right way to tell a story. It takes time to metabolize feelings, scene, and thought, to integrate them. And this is, for the most part, a good thing.
Thank you, Dianna, for that really beautiful talk. We have time for some questions. We have time for some questions and some percussion. What's on your minds? Anybody have a question for Dianna? I can start. Oh, there's one. All right.
Hi, so you talked about like the different categories of obituaries that you pick. What exactly went into your process of picking each one, and which one was the, sorry, just lost my train of thought. What like went into the process of picking each obituary? Yeah.
I have so many of them, and the process has changed over time. At first, I wanted to find writers. I don't read all of them, but when I read some of them, I really want to find something in them. Like I'm working on a series of just war criminals, and I really want to find words in those, but there's not always words. I mean, there's a lot of words, but they don't make sense. So they have to kind of fulfill a certain, I don't know, they have to sound right, you know. But I have so many, it's overwhelming, and you know, I don't have time to read them all, but I have a giant archive of these, and I don't know. Sometimes they find me, you know.
I have to ask as a follow-up to that, it seems as though you're probably making some selections with the books as well that are damaged by the bookworm. And so I wonder, are there any parallels in the way that you kind of make choices in each of those different areas, or is there something to learn about the choices you're making with the obituaries from what you're doing and making choices about the books, or some kind of connection there? Could you comment? Thank you.
So the Biblioteca Burgoa has 30,000 volumes, and about 30% are damaged. And most of them are liturgical texts, and I'm not so interested in those. The last one in the video is a liturgical, it's a sermon, and it must be a famous sermon for it to be printed. I think I gravitated more to the early modern science books that the priests or friars from the Dominican order, that's where the books are coming from monasteries and convents, where books were deaccessioned when the separation between church and state happened in Mexico. And I mean, there's a lot I can say about the Dominican order. They are the order that created Inquisition. Yeah. So I think that one of the books, the one with the four hands, it's called Madre Maleficarum. It's a famous book called The Hammer of Witches, which the librarians didn't show it to me until one day before I had an exhibition. And then when they showed it to me, they said poetic justice. And I mean, that's ascribing a moral intent to the larva, which I think is a human thing to do, but they're amoral, really. So, I mean, I'm giving you a very long answer, but it has to do with like the poignancy of what I'm looking at and the strangeness of it. I mean, there's books I can show, but there's books that are about the punishment of early Christians, and there's like holes on their bodies and torture and horrific, and so that's another interesting thing. Or the subterranean worlds that have holes, but I mean, I was so disappointed that there were nicer holes in that one. Yeah, and I was telling Toby's class yesterday that I don't know which type of insect made which type of hole, but I'm entering this place where I want to know. I haven't wanted to know for a long time, because I wanted to just have a non-expert entry into this. And with the obituaries, I mean, maybe it's the same, you know. There's the other thing is that the Burgoa Library, they have been so willing to share this material with me. Other libraries don't want to show these things. And the Burgoa Library shares these things because the books arrive that way. And so they clean them. And I hesitate to say clean them, right? Because I mean, this is a... But they removed the remains. And so there's cavities. But there were some of that, depending on the insect, sometimes there's no dust left. And sometimes there is dust. I was telling also Toby's class that it's fascinating that there's some bugs that live inside of a book for many generations. Like kids, they hang out, they go to parties, they die, they're born. So.
When you make a new piece, how do you pick between languages?
It's been mostly in English. So, because I've been spending more time in Mexico, the readings are in Spanish. A lot of artist books that I made for the show in Mexico. Yeah, it's, I mean, I think that there's also the matter of like not knowing how to say things in Spanish anymore.
Not from the last question, but the question before, as you were answering, absolutely came to life when you were mentioning the way in which people were, their personalities, since they do. I love that. And it causes me to wonder, as I was watching the obituary montage, whatever that was, it was so much about people's professions, their jobs, the things they did, the way in which they behaved in public, in other words. Could you comment on why that choice instead of personality or things they believed in or, you know, quirky things they'd done or sorrows or family relationships? Could you just comment on how that happened? Why are you covering something or trying to expose something? What's going on?
So that's just for this live lecture. It's not, you know, the obituaries have all that information here on the YouTube, but I used the headlines and just chose those things. And there were also a lot of commas. So the nonverbal is it. I mean, it's also a commentary on this impossibility of summing up somebody's life. It's impossible. And like I said, you know, with the war criminals, and one was a beekeeper, one was a carpenter. And, you know, and nobody is remembered for just one thing. So there's no satisfying way of negotiating with the New York Times.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just beside myself. I'm so curious about your discussion of rhythm, mostly from a maker's perspective. But I was also thinking a lot about this notion of slowing down or slowing perception from a reader's perspective. And I wonder how much that's something that you're thinking about. I really experienced it in the obituary series because of the environments. And the even spacing, and this need to sort of stop and retrace with my eyes to figure out exactly where words were beginning and ending. But you know, also in some of the way that you're thinking about moving through a book and turning pages. So I'd just love to hear about, how you're thinking about tempo on the reader's end, if at all.
With how they're reading the obituary pieces, for example?
Yeah, or I mean, it strikes me that a lot of the commentary that I found so beautiful in your talk was about the way that time becomes a material for you as you're making these pieces, and I'm just wondering how you're thinking about time as a material that your audience might also be experiencing in your pieces.
Okay. So if I understand your question correctly, a lot of times people say to me, oh, it's so labor intensive. And that really annoys me. Because when I was editing video, it was very labor intensive for me. And so there's a lot of really good work about labor, but that people can see the time. And I think that's what is interesting to me. In terms of the reading, like for this lecture, I didn't know if I went too fast when I was showing the obituary pieces, because, I mean, I tricked myself through things so I would slow down in my notes, because my tendency would be to move very quickly and not give you time to read them, and I also didn't want to read them for you before you read them. But when you're seeing them in a static form, you can spend some time with them. I know that sometimes there's a frustration by readers or viewers of the work that they cannot read it. And then I've heard from people who are dyslexic who say to me, this is perfect, this is how I read it.
Yes.
You know? So I don't think we all read like graphines the same way. You know that part in Lucretius where he's talking about words being atoms? I think that like I keep thinking about letters instead of, if the words are atoms, the letters are subatomic. And I think that's another way of reading one letter by letter. Because once you have this no space between words, then you need to see words inside words, that kind of thing. think there was a question.
Thank you so much for that very moving talk. And my question really is related to what you've asked as well. And it has to do with rhythm and pacing and time. I was noticing that you're interested in predictable rhythms, right? The repetition of the daily newspaper, for example. But it's in tension with a very unpredictable rhythm down. And then there's that sort of cosmological, very glacial, slow pace of intervention into like planetary material, or the bookworm, also very glacial. So that, in contrast to the very predictable rhythms of glyphs, right, and that embroidery of the same length over and over, for example. So how do you think about pacing and rhythm when it comes to these really disparate scales of time?
I think I'm looking for a perspective. I don't know if that answers it. I'm looking to feel hopeful. I don't, like the time of the mountain. That's the best way I can answer it. I find that sewing is very soothing because of the repetition. Because there's things that I cannot control, obviously, but I think that thinking about that glacial speed, I think for me it's soothing too, just like repetition.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. Thank you. I'm wondering if you've made more than one. It's almost a kind of erasure that you're making from the obituaries, and I'm wondering if there are times that you have made multiple obituaries of the obituary. Because the work you're making is it is a new kind of obituary. It is, in some ways, the obituary for the obituary. Yeah, because I can imagine some of those are so rich in history and language that there would be multiple sort of simultaneous possibilities for what you pull out.
Yeah, I want to show you something. So this is the obituary project is system-based. Maybe it's about the question about having something that has a system, and so because there's so many options, so many newspapers, so many, like there's also the short form, the ones that people pay to put on. I mean, those are really personal. They're not public figures. They don't belong to a public scrutiny, I think, in the same way. And but a part of the system is that just one per obituary. I know that there's so many interesting ones, but I think I picked the best one. Because sometimes I circle things, like it all started over tea, was radiate human life. Radiate human life doesn't work, but there is no return. I think for me it works better. The Gregory Rabasa one, like torment began with the first word. That wasn't the first thing I found. It took me like years to see it. Like it's in front of you, but you cannot see it. Yeah, some of them are immediate. But I want to find the one from Albert. So it's hard to see. It's so small. But he was referring to the censorship of E.H. Lawrence, because he uses the word fuck, and he was defending it because it said something, we have no word in English for this act. And so by taking out the word act, we have no word in English for this. So it's also like, where do I decide to end? So yes, it's the obituary of the obituary. I joke with people that when I die, my obituary will be open. So.
I just have another comment of, after like looking at these obituaries, it kind of really puts into perspective of like, when we die, what are we known for? And this kind of thing that quite a lot of people were known for what their passion was and what the love of their life was. And I think that was really kind of expressive in how these obituaries was and specifically what you pulled out from them. And so it makes me think about what my obituary is at, pretty much of like, what will I be known for, and like, will people know what my passion is and stuff like that. So I think that's really nice. Let's see.
You should write it.
That's a good idea, I'm not gonna lie.
Any other questions for Dianna Frid? Sorry.
I don't know if this is a question, but I want to get back to the rhythm issue, because when I saw the letters without spacing, it reminded me of learning a language. When you are first learning, you can't tell where the end of one word is sometimes in the beginning of another. And then at some point it slows down. And you hear the differences. That has to do with rhythm of the language. I don't know if that was in your thinking at all as you were working on this, that kind of process.
And I think that it takes a long time to figure out why, at least to me, it takes me a long time, why we do what we do, but I do think it has something to do with the differences between Spanish, being a native speaker of Spanish, but having left as a teenager, so not having been an adult in English until recently, that making an effort, in sort of not being an adult in Spanish, having made an effort to go back. But I think that there's a fascination with the stepmother language for me. I don't know. Okay, one last.
I could just stop laughing.
Yeah.
On the embroidery of the block letters, what was the material you were embroidering on? It almost looked like plastic. So I'm wondering what that material was.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's graphite. It's drawing.
Okay.
It's just like pencil. So I'd say it's embroidery on graphite, but not on that in that order, because then it would be impossible. The graphite comes later.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Dianna again for this.